You're listening to the Mythcreant podcast with your hosts, Oren Ashkenazi, Chris Winkle, and Bunny.
There was a castle by a waterfall with a pink and purple wall and a princess living there. She had no parents and was all alone. She got by on her own and she liked it pretty well. 'Cause she never wore socks. She had a pet snake. She bought her a guitar and she ate a whole cake. And there wasn't anybody there to tell her what to do, so she did what she wanted to. Everybody knew the story of the princess who saved herself.
Welcome to the Mythcreant podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Oren.
So I'm not going to do any meta jokes this time. It doesn't feel right for this topic that we're going to be covering this time.
Yeah, well, sign of the times.
Sign of the times. I know. So yeah, just in case you're not an American and you don't follow American politics, which feels like everybody does given that we're a superpower. So yeah, we're not in a good political situation right now. We're in the middle of an attempted authoritarian takeover. And when I say attempted, I just mean we don't know whether or not it will succeed.
Yeah, I would like to live in less interesting times if I had that option.
Yep. I feel like that scene in Lord of the Rings when like Frodo's like, "Oh, I wish Bilbo had never found the ring, and I wish I never had to take it." And Gandalf's like, "Oh well, we don't have that choice. We can only choose what to do with the time we have."
Yeah, I wish certain Lord of the Rings quotes were less relevant.
Yep. But anyway, so there is hope. There is, because we don't know what's going to happen. So, and our stories do matter. We may not have money, but we do have cultural influence. Each one of us. So, and we know that our stories matter because there have been, cultural forces and times in America's history where people have aimed to stop storytellers from engaging in political expression. In particular, the Cold War period, when everybody was terrified that if writers talked about politics, we would all become communist. This was a real thing where apparently a lot of creative writing programs in universities were started to try to create writers that were American to counter Russian writers.
Well, Russia did have a bit of an early lead in the literary legacy department, so we needed to catch up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, people think her stories matter because they do matter. And but even with that, some of that resistance to adding politics to our stories, we have some great political stories. I think Star Trek in particular is a notable beacon of, political storytelling, especially I think since it was written for everyone. I mean, we also have some really heavy reads of dystopian literature, but I love it when stories that are really pulpy and engaging also talk about politics, which is one of the cool things about, for instance, Space Sweepers.
Before we get into the specifics of how you might write your story for a given effect, I do want to say something that I think is the most important thing if you're trying to resist with your storytelling in any way, which is, if you don't listen to anything else we say, is to not capitulate in advance. And that, if you were thinking of writing a gay character or a story where an evil dictator gets eaten by piranhas or something, and now you're like, oh, I don't know if I should do that in the current climate, the most valuable thing you can do is to do it anyway. And I'm not even saying you should do that, because that's not always safe for everybody, but if you're trying to resist, there it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What we need the most right now is to normalize resistance and courage, and to persist in using the freedoms that they want to take away from us. And then encourage everybody else to do the same. So we don't even need to change minds. We just need to bolster the courage of those who already know and care about what is right.
Yeah, and that is the other thing, right? Is that people are always wondering, oh, what story can I tell that will convince people that fascism and bigotry are wrong? And, I'm not going to say you can't do that, but I will also say that it is just as, if not more important sometimes, for stories to energize people who already think those things are wrong. Your story might not change anyone's mind. It's very hard to change people's minds, but it might make people who already feel that way more likely to do something, or normalize the idea that they might do something. Stuff like that.
Yeah. As they say, fear is contagious, but courage is contagious too.
Yeah.
So that's dead. Again, let's talk about, what can you do? There's lots of different things you can do. And you can do whatever fits you, whatever fits your story, because there's tons of ways to resist.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go like immediately to writing about fascism, right? Now, if you are really passionate about history and knowledgeable about history, and like that's something that you're really interested in doing, that's fine. But like that's also something that is very intense, takes more knowledge, it's going to be trickier. So, don't think that just if you want to, write something in resistance to fascism, then you have to depict fascism, right? You don't need to. And in many ways, it's better to, again, start with the positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's the Star Trek way of doing it, right? It's like, hey, instead of having an episode where Uhura has to overcome racism to become an officer on the bridge, we're just going to show that she's an officer on the bridge. And, no big deal. That's just how it is. And that was a pretty powerful act in the 60s. It's hard to overstate how big a deal that was at the time. And to a certain extent, how big a deal that is now. Because what's the funniest thing to me about right-wing reactionaries is they get so much angrier about a visible black person than they do about a story straight up telling them they are evil. It's like the funniest thing I've ever seen. Like the amount of rage of something like The Acolyte, which to be fair did turn out to be bad, but like there was rage about it way before that, right? Just because there was a trailer where there was a visible black woman that drove them into a froth, compared to Andor, which is a story about how they are the bad guys and how they're evil, and they actually like Andor. like for the most, like not universally, but in right-wing spaces, Andor's pretty popular, and it's wild to me that's how the dynamic seems to work.
Yeah, it is interesting that many people, on the alt-right have sort of embraced this idea of being kind of evil trolls as like part of their identity. It is weird, right? You would think that nobody would want to identify as evil, and I'm not saying that all fascists think that they are evil, but at some level they've chosen to embrace that. And this is why, again, when you do depict fascists, one of the tricks is, you don't want to make them look cool, right? A lot of times we like to have cool villains, but when it gets a little too close to home, then we just don't want them to look cool anymore, which, complicates this picture. But I mean, at least now we have an example since, the fascists are all a bunch of clowns. And
they are really bad at everything.
They're really bad at everything. I've been fascinated by how that is a built-in part of this, right? That whenever somebody demands personal loyalty, all of the actual competent people don't want to work for that person anymore, right? And then they end up with a bunch of people who are just super bad at their jobs, but are selected because of their loyalty.
Yeah.
And so those things are very much connected. So going back to representation, huge yes to representation, right? Just remember, Trump is trying to punish institutions for having diversity initiatives. Okay?
Yeah.
So like we need diverse stories now more than ever, so a big step that you can take is just diversifying your characters, right? And I know sometimes it is intimidating to represent somebody from a group you are not part of, but there are, some simple things you can do, right? My general process for this is, start by trying to match the roles in your story with a marginalized trait that makes it so that you're kind of avoiding stereotypes, right? And if you don't know, let's say, you want to you're thinking about adding a black person or disabled person or queer person, and you don't know what kind of stereotypes affect them, a lot of times you can just like do internet searches on like racist movies, for instance, and just start reading what people say about like stories that are problematic, and you'll start to see patterns, right? And things to avoid there. You'll start to see people talk about stereotypes, and that can be really a formative way to start if you feel like you don't know anything.
Yeah. There is one thing about this that is kind of interesting to me, and I don't want to say it's a good thing because there's nothing good about what's happening now, but there is an interesting phenomenon that is less tenable now than it used to be, where when there's like some modicum of progress, a bunch of the worst people you know will be like, okay, well there was a small amount of progress. That means progress is now the status quo, so I can rebel against it by being anti-progressive. And that's just much harder to sell than it used to be, right? There was a period where it was like, oh, well, diverse stories are the norm, so I'm going to be cool and edgy by not doing that. And it's like, all right, well, now the actual president is saying no more diversity, so unless love to lick boots, I guess you'd better be punk and diverse, is, I guess, the message of that.
Yeah, I get to be a cool rebel. And yeah, so, and then just, you don't want to pick groups because you feel like, oh, they fit the role. That can be actually a troubling sign. So if you have like nature people in your story, you don't want to pick like Native Americans for that, right?
Yeah.
Because if you try to like, oh yeah, that seems like it fits this marginalized trait, that a lot of times that means you are actively cultivating a stereotype.
Mhm.
So you just try to avoid that. Don't put your lesbian couple in a role where they're going to die. Right. So it's a first, just try to match again the story role with the character of the right trait, so that you're not playing into those kinds of stereotypes and tropes that are problematic. And then making them feel like they are part of their group. It's not about the big stuff, it's about the little things. Okay? So it's in this case, consultants, and again, consultants don't have to be expensive, right? You can find somebody who is a little bit of knowledgeable to talk to you about your character and ask them questions. But it's about little subtle things that are part of their daily life that kind of make them feel like they're more part of their group. And again, having representation is better than no representation, right? So if you feel like you're not doing enough to like make a black character feel black or a queer character feel queer, usually it's better to still have them in your story.
Yeah, at least where we are now.
Right, yeah. And again, if we had more representation all the time, that was great. That threshold might change. But right now, I would just err on the side of having that representation, right? But then you can, look, it's like, okay, this group of queer people, what are their favorite musicians, right? And have that person listen to some of those musicians, right? And again, those little small touches are the things that you want to go for. And as opposed to generally making the plot all about their marginalized trait, getting really personal about it, that you're getting into a little bit more sensitive territory and you don't need it. So just go for little bits of flavor and you'll be okay.
Alternatively, and again, I find this morbidly amusing, is you can sometimes achieve the same effect just by like giving your cool white dude lead like some traits that the right wing doesn't like. Like, because again, to compare, say, now Superman to Andor, right? Both of them are at least somewhat political, like overtly. They have overtly political stories, but Andor is so much more political than Superman. Like, Superman, mild spoilers, has a storyline about how it's bad when U.S. allied nations murder civilians. And yeah, cool. Good message. And obviously the right-wingers got upset about that. But Andor has, like, several times that. It's got the anti-prison system, and anti-right-wing misinformation, and anti-police state, and I can't prove this. This is pure hypothesizing and speculation, but it really feels like the reason Superman set everyone off was that Superman is shown to be nice and kind of sweet and a little soft, which they're like, ew, girly. Whereas Andor is extremely grim and everyone's hard and jaded. And so there's no fear of that in Andor. And again, I'm not saying this to knock Andor. Andor's a good show. It's just pretty obvious to me now what it is that upsets the right wing and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so just making your straight white male lead like a nice supportive guy can be enough sometimes.
I mean, I really do think there's so much we can do with like men and masculinity that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Authoritarian culture is about the belief that there's some like alpha male who is inherently superior to others, will like swoop in and take care of all of your problems for you, and you just have to be loyal to him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's really what they believe and they find comforting. But like that's obviously extremely problematic and antithetical to democracy. But it's scary to me that I can recognize this specific alpha male from our stories.
Yeah.
Right? All these stories where we have this like super powerful male character that has to be like the best, has to be the most powerful more than any other man, and also women. But like the emphasis is that he's more powerful than other men and always knows what's best, right? And makes decisions for everybody else, right? That is authoritarianism as like a cultural trait right there.
And he's like 8 feet tall and 3 refrigerators wide and eats 5 billion eggs. Right?
And he talks like this.
Oh man, I love it when we switch over to like a male voice actor at the end of a romantasy novel, and you get to hear what the male lead is supposed to sound like. It's like, okay, man, are you speaking through a subwoofer over there? What's going on?
But again, just allowing men to, not be larger than life perfect caricatures.
Hang on, I'm gonna have to stop you at allow men. I don't think we should allow men. No more allowing that. It's done. We had our run. It's over now.
Because yeah, I mean, the fascists, a lot of fascism, a whole segment of it is about making men manly again and being strong. And a lot of times, nationalistic authoritarian cultures in general put a lot of emphasis on masculinity because that feeds into the being militant.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what they want. And so having men and glorifying men who are actually sweet and sensitive and need support sometimes and don't have to be perfect and are not there to just dick measure with every other guy in the story, like that's huge. that is a huge difference. Even if it seems strange, that does make a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, it'll make your story stand out these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, and again, did the Superman story put emphasis on Superman being an immigrant?
A little bit.
Bit?
Not a ton, right? Like some. I think James Gunn made a bigger deal about that than it is in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it mentions that he's not from... There's a whole thing about how he's not from here, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
Mild spoilers, Lex Luthor runs a troll farm that, like, is clearly doing some rip from the headlines stuff about, how right-wing trolls operate. So again, there's a little bit of that, sure.
Yeah, and I do think that some of the difference between Andor and Superman is just when it's abstract ideas that people are looking at, it's easy for them to, I think, have that cognitive dissonance to kind of detach, right? And just not think about what it means or assume that, of course, the despotic empire is the libs. Mm-hmm. Even if it's obviously not the libs.
Well, I mean, people are really, really good at rationalizing away messages that they don't like in stories that they enjoy. And this isn't just a right-wing thing. Leftists do it too. I've seen so many essays from at least left-of-center people trying to convince me that Tolkien's not a monarchist, right? Because they like Lord of the Rings. And it's like, no, it's okay. You can still like Lord of the Rings. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yep, no. Or like Dune. There's there a lot of leftists who like Dune?
Yeah, I'll give them that one a little bit. There's a little bit more in Dune than there is in Lord of the Rings, but yes, that there is that too. But like again with Andor, it's like I made a habit of like looking in on right-wing spaces to see what they were saying about Andor, and there was some understanding that Andor was talking about them, but like most of it was rationalizing. Like, no, the Gorman protests can't be anything like real life protests because they aren't waving Mexican flags, Here, I found a tissue. I'm going to put the tissue over the metaphor, and now it's not real, and it can't hurt me anymore.
Right, yeah. So that's the thing about those metaphors, analogies. again, if it's like an abstract concept, it's much easier for people to ignore it. But like when you have a black person on screen, right now it becomes very clear,
And like
what
just
you stand for.
yeah, and just like Andor is so fascinating because you would have expected it to make them mad because you've got Diego Luna there, who is like a Latino with an obvious accent. But no, apparently that doesn't do it. They are, while committing horrible acts on many groups of Latinos, they are also willing to be like, maybe this one's okay. Right? It's like, oh, it's just a window into the right-wing mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, it's strange. Well, I mean, he is a kind of gritty anti-hero, right?
Right. I think that's what ended up mattering, right? Is that he was like super gritty and everything's gritty, and I think they liked that. And again, I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that or that your gritty story is inherently right wing. I'm just describing how the reactions that I see.
So what we're saying is that fluffy bunnies are praxis.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, you should go and everyone go write cozies now, because cozies are the only way to resist. You heard that here on the Mythcreants podcast. See how many panic pieces about cozies we can generate.
But yeah, I mean, more ideas. Again, stories that are about valuing things that are being harmed, right? Like immigration, right? Stories about immigrants, right? And immigrants are not in one shape or size. There are all kinds of immigrants. Value of public services, right? Obviously, that's a big deal right now. Value of free speech rights, and specifically, free speech is such a weird thing because they are always claiming that they want, their free speech while trying to suppress our free speech.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's easier to reconcile once you remember that they are liars and they lie constantly.
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's easy for people who, again, have this are rationalizing things away to rationalize freedom as us getting our way and you not getting your way.
Yes.
Right. Freedom for them means imposing their will on somebody else instead of them. Because again, it's a zero sum instead of their enemies imposing their will on them or something.
Right.
Like that.
Exactly. That is freedom in my mind. When I get all of the cookies are finally free.
But in this case, specifically the ability to criticize an authority figure. Right. It was what I would go for in this free speech category. And yeah, that's important. The value of democracy and equality, which democracy depends on. And I think this is really key because we're talking about things like the rise of fascism and authoritarianism. The thing that's going on here is that democracy inherently is tied to equality because democracy is based on the idea that we are all equal and therefore that's why we should all get a vote, right? And it's easy because classism is, even if it's bad today, it is much better than it used to be. And so it's easy to forget how things were, right? And that people believed that God chose who was poor and who was rich, and those were just your inherent traits. And I mean, even when America started, only people who owned property could vote. Only men who owned property, white men who owned property could vote. And so, but to make our democracy better, right? It justifies, in order to justify where everybody should vote instead of a king should rule, we value equality, right? And so those two concepts are just inherently tied together. And that is why the right is abandoning democracy to some extent, is that at least some of them have come to realize that. And they really, really don't want equality, and so they are turning against democracy.
Right. And, this is also where they have all of the lies to rationalize it, right? Like, the illegal immigrants are voting, so actually we have to destroy democracy to save it, that sort of thing, right? They build elaborate headcanons to justify all of it, but yeah.
Right, yeah. There is a lot of rationalization from some of them, but others absolutely know this and are deliberately trying to abandon democracy.
This is true. So what I'm saying is that you should write a story about murdering Aragorn. You gotta do it.
I mean, okay, no, speaking of that, because what was it? The Thorn and what was the Kingfisher story that got a Hugo?
Nettle and Bone.
Nettle and Bone, right. Nettle and Bone is kind of like that, actually. And Nettle and Bone, and I think this is one of the reasons it got a Hugo and was popular, is about how the main character wants to kill the prince that her sister is married to. Because they had, she got married to the prince, but the prince was actually evil and not good. And now she wants to end him. And that is what the story is about.
Very sympathetic premise.
Yeah. So, and again, when we talk about monarchy and fantasy, like I understand the pull towards monarchy and fantasy. I absolutely do. Like, it's nice wish fulfillment. And also you have a character that automatically has the power to do things in your plot, which is also convenient.
It is handy.
Yeah. But the romanticization of monarchy in fantasy is a bit dangerous. And I think we should, again, I don't want to shame anybody for writing about things that bring them joy. I think just my goal is to raise awareness about the implications of those things so that everybody can choose to take whatever is the next step for them, right? Whether it's writing a monarch character that has to fight other monarchs that are bad instead of just being like, all monarchs are good. If that's like your baby step, that's the next step for you, then good, take the next step, right? I think that we should always, embrace enjoyment and not shame people for enjoyment. But the more we understand about some of these patterns, like, the alpha male, right? Obviously, there are a lot of romanticies right now that have these alpha male characters because some women love them. And I do feel like some of that comes from patriarchal propaganda. But again, the goal is not to shame anybody for what they enjoy. The goal is just to be more aware so that everybody can take whatever is their natural next step for them and do what they feel comfortable doing.
There is some funny cognitive dissonance, though, when I'm reading some of these romanticises where the author clearly wants to be progressive in some ways and is like, yeah, this is a world where, like, gay romance is common and it's not discriminated against. This character is non-binary. Anyway, here's my love interest, 8 feet tall, 3 refrigerators wide, the biggest in the land. And I'm like, all right, okay, interesting. Interesting that this is what's happening now. I do hope that when they convert some of these romanticises into movies, because we're really overdue for that. It's weird that it's only just starting to happen. I really hope that however they cast the love interest, that they are accurate to the way they're described in the book. Because then you would immediately realize that's not really very attractive. There's just like this wall of flesh walks on screen and is like, hello, I'm Zayden.
I mean, we talked about the fact that when people are described as, like, men are described as buff, male love interests, that can mislead you into thinking that women like guys to be buffer than they actually like, right? Like, generally that bodybuilder shape with every little muscle popping out is not attractive. But like the way that people describe love interest, always emphasizing their muscles, the reader imagines what they want, right? The purpose of description is just to evoke the imagination. So it's not always perfectly accurate.
Well, it's gonna be when I adapt Shield of Sparrows. Don't you worry. It's you'll see.
Oh gosh. And then one other thing, I have an article on this on portraying collective action. And this in particular has come up because there are some people who are like, no, you shouldn't have a single hero because in real life, we got to work together to solve our problems. And like, okay, I mean, I can absolutely get that. And there's definitely a place for stories about collective action. And I think that's important too. Stories are inherently weighted towards having a single hero, but there are some ways to include collective action in your story. And I have an article that lists, some ideas for doing that. And it can be baby steps, like you just have a hero that knows a activist group and works with them occasionally during the story to your stories about the activist group or what have you.
Or they can all be joined together in an unholy experiment, and now the collective is all one character. It's good. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. No, you can have a hive mind. Why not?
All right. Well, now that we've suggested all protagonists should be replaced with hive minds, because that
Oh man, now my anti-authoritarian story has got to be about the Borg trying to get that queen to go away.
Yeah. Oh, that would have been great. Borg Revolution. I'd watch that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think with that, now that we've come up with the coolest Star Trek idea, we're going to go ahead and call this episode to a close.
If you found this episode useful, consider supporting us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/mythcreants.
And I do want to thank our existing patrons because, stuff's hard, and we appreciate the support. And specifically, Amon Jobber, who's an urban fantasy writer and a connoisseur of Marvel, and also Kathy Ferguson, who's a professor of political theory in Star Trek. And we will talk to you next week.
There was a dragon with a pointy tail. He was bigger than a whale, and his breath was terrible. He scared the princess when he came around, tried to burn the castle down, but she caught him by his tail. Then she tied him to a tree so the dragon couldn't fly. She told him he was mean, and it made the dragon cry. When he finally apologized, she offered him some tea. He accepted it graciously. Now he visits every weekend with the princess who saved herself.
This has been the Mythcreant podcast. Opening closing theme, The Princess Who Saved Herself by Jonathan Colton.